I remember the exact moment my world split in two. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp fall morning that makes you feel like everything is right, like the universe has arranged itself into something clean and manageable. I was standing in the kitchen of our house in Naperville, Illinois, pouring coffee into my travel mug, listening to the sound of Amanda moving around upstairs, the familiar creak of the floorboards above my head. Our son, Ethan, was 4 years old and still asleep. I had a 7 o'clock meeting at the architecture firm where I'd worked for 9 years. Life was ordinary. Life was good. That was the last morning I believed that. I didn't find out the way you see in movies, with lipstick on a collar or a suspicious phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I found out from Linda Caruso, Amanda's best friend since college, who called my cell at 8:47 that morning while I was sitting in the parking garage of my office building, still finishing my coffee. Linda's voice was strange from the first syllable, tight and overly casual, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed what they're about to say but can't quite make it land naturally. "David, I need to tell you something and I need you to understand I'm only calling because I think you deserve to know." I remember setting the coffee mug into the cup holder. I remember the silence in the parking garage, the distant sound of an elevator, the smell of concrete and exhaust. "Amanda has been telling people that Ethan isn't your son." The words sat in the air between us like smoke. I didn't say anything. I couldn't locate my voice. "She's been saying it for a while now. At book club, to some of her other friends. She told my sister at the reunion last month. She said she had an affair around the time Ethan was conceived and that she's pretty sure," those were her words, "she's pretty sure, that Ethan belongs to the other guy. She hasn't told you because she doesn't want to blow up her life." I heard everything Linda said. I processed each word individually, in sequence, like a man reading a sign in a foreign language he only partially understands. But the meaning of it, the full crushing weight of what she was telling me, didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, slow and then suddenly enormous, the way a tsunami looks calm from the shore right before it destroys everything. I thanked Linda. I don't know why. Some automated part of me produced courtesy while the rest of me sat very still with a coffee mug in a parking garage and tried to remember how to breathe. I had been with Amanda for 11 years. We met in graduate school, her in architecture history, me in structural engineering, at a campus mixer I'd almost skipped because I had a deadline on a project. She was laughing at something her friend said when I first saw her across the room, head thrown back, completely unguarded. I fell in love with her laugh first and everything else second. We dated for 3 years, got married in her parents' backyard in Connecticut, moved to Illinois for my job at Alderman and Pierce, and built what I genuinely believed was a good life. A real life. A solid one. I thought of every sacrifice. I thought of the year I'd turned down a position in Seattle because Amanda had just started her job at the design studio and didn't want to uproot. I thought of the weekends I'd taken on freelance work so we could afford the house in Naperville, the neighborhood with the good schools, the yard Ethan loved to run around in. I thought of the way Amanda had cried in the hospital when Ethan was born, how she'd grabbed my hand and said, "He looks like you already," and I had laughed and cried at the same time because he was small and red and perfect and I couldn't see resemblance to anyone on earth, just a brand new person who was somehow ours. And now this. I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at the house, the blue shutters I'd painted myself last summer, the mums Amanda had planted along the front walk, the basketball hoop I'd installed for Ethan even though he was still too small to use it properly. Then I walked inside. Amanda was in the living room with Ethan, who was finally awake, watching cartoons in his pajamas and eating a bowl of cereal. She looked up when I walked in, surprised, and then immediately concerned. "David. What are you doing home? Did something happen?" "Send him upstairs," I said. My voice was very quiet. I didn't recognize it. She looked at me for a long moment, reading something in my face. Then she turned to Ethan, smooth and practiced. "Hey, Bug, go play in your room for a little bit, okay? Daddy and I need to talk." Ethan looked at me with his big dark eyes and slid off the couch without protest. He was an easy kid, always had been. Good-natured. Sweet. I watched him climb the stairs and felt something shift dangerously in my chest. I turned to Amanda. Linda called me. The color left her face. Not gradually, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. In that single moment, before she said a single word, I knew every word Linda had told me was true. If there had been any doubt in me, any small merciful uncertainty, it died right there, watching Amanda's face go pale and still. "David, you told people Ethan isn't my son." I said it flatly. Not a question. You sat in book club and told women we know, our friends, that my son might not be my son. You told Linda's sister. You told God knows who else. And you came home to me every day and said nothing. It's more complicated than, no. The word came out harder than I intended, louder. I felt the rage beginning to build behind my sternum, something hot and pressurized that I was barely holding back. No, Amanda, it is not more complicated. Either you had an affair and lied to me for 5 years, or you didn't. Which is it? She sat down on the couch. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. Her eyes were wet, and some furious part of me noted that she'd managed to cry before I did, and hated her for it. I was with someone else, she said, very quietly. It was before I knew I was pregnant. I ended it when I found out. I was so scared, David, I didn't know what to do, and I decided you were the father, because I wanted you to be, and Ethan looked so much like you in the beginning, I really thought, you decided. I stared at her. You decided I was the father. Like it was a choice you were making for me. Like I didn't deserve to know. I didn't want to lose our family. So you protected your family by lying to every woman at your book club. I laughed, and it was a terrible sound, nothing like humor. You didn't protect our family, Amanda. You just protected yourself. And you let me raise a child for 4 years without knowing whether he was mine. He loves you. You're his father in every way that, don't. I held up a hand. Don't you dare finish that sentence right now. You don't get to tell me what kind of father I am while you're sitting there having kept this from me for years. Who is he? The other man. Who is he? She hesitated. Who is he? My voice broke on the last word, and I hated that too. His name is Greg Holloway. He was a client at the studio. It happened for about 4 months. It was over before Ethan was born, I swear to you it was completely over, 4 months. I turned away from her. I walked to the window and stood there with my back to her, looking out at the yard, at the basketball hoop, at the ordinary neighborhood street where children rode bikes and nothing was on fire. 4 months. And you said nothing. 4 or 5 years. I'm sorry. I need you to leave, I said. I need you to take Ethan and go to your mother's, or wherever you want to go, and I need you out of this house today. David, please, let's talk about this, I am not going to say that again. There was a long silence. Then I heard her get up. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I heard the low murmur of her voice talking to Ethan, heard his small confused questions, heard her answer them with a brightness that made my stomach turn. I stood at the window and didn't move until I heard suitcases, until I heard the front door close, until I heard her car back out of the driveway. Then I sat down on the living room floor, still in my work clothes, and I put my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I sat there for a long time waiting for it, and it didn't come. What came instead was something colder and more deliberate, something that settled into the middle of my chest like a stone. I'd been trusting someone for 11 years who had been deciding what truths I was allowed to have. And now I was going to find out everything she'd kept from me, and I was going to respond to every single piece of it. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Tom Briggs had handled our home purchase and updated our wills when Ethan was born. He wasn't a divorce attorney, but he knew people. I left him a voicemail that was steady and brief. Then I called my older brother, Ryan, who lived 40 minutes away in Evanston. Ryan picked up on the second ring, and when I told him what had happened, there was a silence on the line, and then he said, "I'm coming over." "You don't have to, I'm coming over," he said again. Ryan arrived with his wife, Christine, and they sat with me at the kitchen table while I laid out what I knew. Ryan is 3 years older than me and has always been the kind of person who becomes calmer as situations become more serious, like a counterweight. He listened to everything without interrupting, and when I was done, he said, "First thing is the DNA test." "I know. Before anything else gets decided, you need to know." "I know, Ryan. Because if Ethan is yours, that changes what this looks like. And if he isn't, I know what it changes," I said. My voice was steady. "I need to know either way. I need the truth. Whatever it is." Christine reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She didn't say anything, which was exactly right. I contacted a DNA testing company the next morning. Because Ethan was 4 and couldn't consent to anything, I needed to navigate this carefully. My attorney, by then I'd spoken to Tom and he'd connected me with a family law specialist named Patricia Ng, advised me on how to proceed. I arranged a visit with Ethan at Amanda's mother's house in Downers Grove. Amanda was cold and watchful the entire time, and her mother, Carol, couldn't look at me directly, which told me Carol already knew too. I held Ethan and played trucks with him on Carol's living room floor and tried not to let him see anything wrong in my face. When I hugged him goodbye, I did the cheek swab as naturally as I could manage, chatting to him about his favorite cartoon, and he sat still and complied with the trusting openness of a child who has never had a reason not to trust. I drove away from Carol's house and sat in a parking lot and allowed myself 5 minutes of falling apart. Then I drove home. The 2 weeks I waited for the results were the longest of my life. During that time, I learned things. I'm a methodical person by training. You can't design structures that hold weight without being methodical, and I applied that discipline to finding out the full scope of what Amanda had done. Ryan knew a private investigator through a colleague at work, a man named Dale Ferris, who was quiet and efficient. Through Dale, I confirmed what I suspected: Greg Holloway was still in the area. He'd left Amanda's design studio 18 months after the affair ended and now ran his own small interior design consultancy in Oak Park. He was married. His wife's name was Jennifer. They had 2 children together. He did not know, as far as Dale could determine, that there was any possibility he had fathered a child with a former client. I also learned, through a conversation with Linda, who felt terrible and was eager to help in any way she could, that Amanda had been talking about the paternity question for nearly 2 years. 2 years. It wasn't a moment of guilty confession to one person. It was a sustained, repeated disclosure to a social circle of women who knew me, who had come to our home for dinners, who had given us baby gifts when Ethan was born. They had all known something I hadn't. They had looked at me at dinner parties and neighborhood barbecues knowing what Amanda had told them, and not one of them had said a word. I wrote down every name Linda gave me. I didn't know yet what I would do with the list, but I wrote the names down. The results came on a Thursday morning via a secure online portal. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and logged into the account. Ethan was my son. The probability of paternity was 99.997%. I sat with that number for a long time. I turned it over and examined it from every angle. My son was my son. Amanda had been wrong, or she had been lying about being uncertain, using it as some kind of private leverage or cover story or perverse self-justification I couldn't fully understand. But regardless of her reasoning, she had planted doubt about my child in the minds of women throughout our social circle, let me go on being a father without telling me what she'd said to others, and allowed me to spend the last 2 weeks not knowing whether the little boy I loved was biologically mine. She had done all of that while living in our house, sleeping in our bed, eating at our table, and she had made the calculation, repeatedly, over years, that her comfort was worth more than my right to know. The affair I might have eventually processed. People are flawed. Marriages hit walls. I wasn't certain I could have forgiven it, but it was a category of human failure I could at least understand. The deliberate, sustained choice to let other people know what she'd done while keeping me in the dark, that was something different. That was a specific and targeted form of contempt. She had decided I was someone to be managed, not told. That I was the last person in this situation who deserved the truth. I called Patricia and told her the results. That's good news on one front, she said. But it doesn't change the grounds for divorce if you want to proceed. The affair is documented. Her disclosures to third parties about paternity are documented. We have a strong case for primary custody given her demonstrated willingness to deceive you about matters directly concerning your son. I want to proceed, I said. And I want primary custody of Ethan. Then let's get started. Patricia was systematic and thorough. She prepared the divorce petition while I continued gathering. Dale Ferris had given me documentation, records of communication patterns, a timeline that matched what Linda had told me, corroboration of the affair's duration. Linda agreed to provide a written statement detailing what Amanda had said about paternity across multiple social occasions over a period of 2 years. 3 other women from the book club, shaken by guilt and contacted by Linda, agreed to provide similar statements. They were uncomfortable. Some of them apologized to me directly, and I accepted the apologies without warmth, because what they'd done, what they'd all chosen to do, was a kindness to Amanda that came at my expense. I also reached out to Jennifer Holloway. This was the hardest call I made during that entire period. I sat with her number on my phone for most of an evening before I dialed. When she answered, I introduced myself and said, simply, that I had information about her husband that I believed she had a right to know. I told her about the affair, the timeline, and the question of paternity that had since been resolved. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't editorialize. I read from the factual summary I'd written out because I didn't trust myself to be accurate if I spoke from emotion alone. Jennifer was very quiet throughout. At the end, she said, "How do I know you're telling the truth?" I told her I would email her the documentation I had. She thanked me in a voice that sounded very far away, and we ended the call. I don't know what Jennifer did with that information. It wasn't my place to control that. She deserved the truth. I gave her the truth. What she did with it was hers. The divorce papers were served to Amanda on a Friday afternoon, 3.5 weeks after she had left the house with Ethan. I know the exact moment she received them because she called me 11 minutes later, and her voice was completely different from anything I'd heard from her since the confrontation in the living room. The careful regret was gone. The practiced sadness was gone. She was furious. You hired a private investigator. You reached out to Jennifer Holloway. David, what is wrong with you? Her kids are going to. Greg Holloway made choices that affected his family, I said. Those consequences are his. Not mine. You're trying to destroy me. I'm trying to make sure a court has accurate information about your conduct during our marriage. That's not destruction, Amanda. That's documentation. I will fight you on Ethan. I will fight you with everything you can try, I said. My attorney has 4 written statements from women in your social circle confirming that you publicly expressed doubt about our son's paternity over a period of 2 years. She has documentation of your affair. She has the DNA results. You're welcome to fight. There was silence on the line. Then, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe any of this is real, I said, honestly. But it is. So here we are. I ended the call. The next weeks were brutal in the administrative, procedural way that divorce is: meetings with Patricia, financial disclosures, custody arrangement proposals, mediation sessions where Amanda and I sat on opposite sides of a table and didn't look at each other while we talked about Ethan's school schedule and holiday arrangements. Amanda had retained a lawyer named Bob Whitfield who was aggressive and persistent, and he made things slower and more expensive. But the documentation was what it was. The statements from Linda and the other women were what they were. The DNA results were what they were. Every time Whitfield pushed, Patricia had an answer. During this period, I did the thing I'd been putting off since the first morning in the parking garage. I went to see my parents. My father, Leonard, was 71 years old and had been retired for 6 years from 30 years of teaching high school mathematics in Michigan. He had driven down to see me twice since Amanda left, both times at my request, and had been steady and careful and hadn't pressed. My mother, Helen, had done the same. They were good parents, measured and reliable, and I'd inherited whatever steadiness I possessed from both of them. But I had been avoiding the full conversation, the real one, because I knew what was in it for them, and I had been trying to protect them from that. I drove up to their house in Grand Rapids on a Saturday. My mother made lunch. We sat at the table, and I told them everything: the affair, the paternity question, the 2 years of disclosure to Amanda's friends, the DNA results, the divorce filing. My father listened the way he always had, elbows on the table, hands folded, looking directly at me. My mother cried quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a paper napkin, and I apologized for telling her and she waved the apology away. When I finished, my father was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and picked up his phone, an unusual gesture from a man who rarely touched the device, and he pulled up a photograph. He set the phone on the table and turned it to face me. It was Ethan's school photo. Ethan had just started pre-K, and the school had sent home photos in that wallet-sized packet with the mottled blue background. I hadn't thought much about the photo in weeks, too consumed by everything else. But my father had apparently looked at it recently, and now he was looking at me with an expression I'd never quite seen on his face before. Next to the phone, he set another photo. This one was old, printed on the heavier paper stock of a different era, slightly faded at the edges. It was a photo of my father at approximately the same age Ethan was now, 4, maybe 5 years old, also a school photo, also with that particular formal small child posture, also with a very specific arrangement of features. I looked from one photo to the other. They were the same face. Not similar. Not reminiscent of each other. The same wide forehead, the same set of the dark eyes, the same particular line of the jaw, the same full lower lip. Ethan's face and my father's face as a small child, separated by 66 years and utterly, unmistakably identical. I don't have words for what that did to me. I sat there looking at those 2 photos on a table in my parents' kitchen in Grand Rapids and felt something crack open in my chest that was not pain exactly. It was relief, enormous and devastating at the same time. It was confirmation not just in numbers and percentages but in something visible, something anyone could see. Anyone who had ever doubted, anyone Amanda had ever told her whispered uncertainties to, would only need to look at these 2 photographs to feel the absurdity of that doubt. My father didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "He's ours, David. He has always been ours." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My mother picked up both photos and held them side by side and shook her head slowly. "Good Lord," she said softly. "The same boy." I drove home with the old photo of my father tucked carefully in my jacket pocket. I had asked to borrow it and he had given it to me without hesitation, as if he'd already known I would want it. I scanned both photos and had them printed side by side on a single page. It was not something I'd planned to do. It was something I did because it felt necessary, because the visual was more complete than any argument, more final than any document. I sent it to Patricia, who looked at it and said, "I want to include this in our custody filing." I sent it to Ryan, who looked at it and said nothing for a long moment and then sent back, "My God." I sent it to Linda. Linda, to her credit, immediately understood the significance beyond the personal. "Amanda's been talking to these women for 2 years, she said, when she called me after seeing the image. "I think they should see this." "That's what I was thinking." "Let me handle it," she said. There was a new firmness in Linda's voice that hadn't been there before, a resolve that had replaced the guilty, anxious quality she'd had when she'd first called me. These women sat on this for a long time. They should see what they were sitting on. Linda sent the comparison photo to every woman who had heard Amanda's version of events. I don't know every conversation that followed, but I know some of them. I know that at least 3 of those women called Amanda directly, confronting her with what they saw. I know that one of them, a woman named Patricia Chen who had been particularly close to Amanda, told mutual friends what Amanda had done, and the story spread quickly through the social network they'd all shared. By the end of that week, the whispered narrative Amanda had maintained for 2 years, the poor woman privately uncertain about her child's paternity, had been replaced by a different one, and it was not kind to Amanda. I didn't engineer the social fallout. I didn't coordinate it or push it beyond that initial communication. I let the truth do what truth does when it's finally visible. Amanda, meanwhile, was experiencing consequences that arrived from multiple directions at once. The statements those 4 women had made to Patricia had, in some cases, gotten back to Amanda through their own guilt and confession. She knew the full scope of what I had documented. She knew that Jennifer Holloway had confronted her husband, and she knew that Greg Holloway, frantic and desperate to protect his own marriage, had given his wife a version of events that corroborated mine. She knew that the women she had confided in for years now had reason to view her differently. Her lawyer, Whitfield, was maneuvering hard on the custody question, but the mediation sessions were not going well for his side. A family court evaluator had been appointed, and that process was underway. Amanda had presented herself as a dedicated mother wronged by a cold and litigious husband, but the documented timeline, the affairs, the years of paternity doubt spread through their social circle, the DNA resolution she had never shared with her husband, made that narrative difficult to sustain. The evaluator's preliminary impression, communicated through Patricia, was that Amanda's pattern of concealment raised serious questions about her judgment in matters directly affecting Ethan's welfare. Whitfield eventually reached out to Patricia with a settlement proposal. Amanda would not contest primary residential custody. She would agree to a parenting plan that gave me the majority of Ethan's time, with Amanda having ample parenting time on alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. In exchange, I would not pursue additional litigation or make further disclosures to third parties. We went back and forth twice, and Patricia negotiated small but meaningful adjustments to the parenting schedule and to the financial division of assets. I agreed to the final terms. I was sitting in Patricia's office the afternoon the papers were signed. It was a gray March afternoon, the snow just beginning to turn to slush outside the windows. I put my signature on the documents and felt very little of what I expected to feel. No triumph. No collapse. Mostly just a kind of vast, dull steadiness. It was over. The formal part of it was over. I picked up Ethan from Amanda's mother's house that evening, and he ran down the front walk to my car with his backpack bouncing and his shoelaces untied, shouting "Daddy," in the way that small children announce everything at maximum volume, and I crouched down on the cold pavement and caught him and held him for a moment longer than usual. He smelled like the same shampoo he'd always used. He was squirming because he wanted to show me a drawing he'd done at school. Okay, I said. "Let me see." He pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his backpack. It was a drawing of our house, crayon, wildly approximate, featuring a blue lopsided square and what appeared to be either a tree or a dog and a large yellow circle that I understood to be the sun. In the yard in front of the house, he had drawn 2 figures. One was tall and brown-haired. One was small and had a backpack. "That's you and me," he said, pointing at each figure in turn. "I know," I said. "I made it for our house." We'll put it on the refrigerator. He seemed satisfied with this and turned to get into the car. I stood up and looked at the drawing for a moment. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my coat pocket, next to where I'd kept the old photo of my father on the drive back from Grand Rapids. The months that followed were harder than I expected in ways that had nothing to do with Amanda. Ethan was 5, and then 6, and children notice more than you think. He didn't understand divorce in any theoretical sense, but he understood that things were different, and for a period of about 3 months he was clingy and prone to night waking, and I would go into his room and sit on the edge of his bed and stay until he fell back asleep. I didn't mind. It was the kind of tired I could live inside of. I sold the house in Naperville. Too much of what I needed to leave was in the architecture of that place, the walls I'd repainted, the yard I'd planned, the basketball hoop I'd installed and which now felt like an artifact of a story that had been told wrong. I bought a house in Wilmette, smaller, closer to the lake, with a kitchen that got good morning light and a backyard that Ethan immediately designated as a soccer practice area even though he had never played organized soccer. We put the crayon drawing on the refrigerator. I told him we would slowly make the new house feel like ours, and he said, "It already does, Daddy," with the simple certainty of a 6-year-old, and I believed him. I threw myself into work in a way I hadn't in years. Alderman and Pierce were developing a mixed-use project in the West Loop, and I was the lead structural engineer, and the demands of it were enormous and genuinely absorbing. There were problems to solve that had the particular quality of good problems, complex and resistant, but yielding to method. I had always loved the work. I had, without quite noticing it, let marriage and domesticity push it to the margins of my attention. Now it came back to the center, and I let it. I started going to the gym again, something I'd done consistently until Ethan was born and then abandoned in the fog of early parenthood. I went at 6 in the morning before the school drop-off and found, somewhat to my surprise, that I liked being there, liked the simplicity of it, the directness of physical effort, the way your mind quiets when your body has something real to do. I lost 15 pounds that I'd been carrying for years without noticing. I slept better. I looked, according to Ryan, like a person again, which I took as a compliment. Ryan and Christine came to the new house almost every weekend for the first few months, sometimes with their kids, and the house was loud and full on those days, and Ethan loved having his cousins around. Christine, who had always been warm but slightly reserved with me before all of this, had become quietly fierce in her advocacy. She had sent a pointed and factual message to 2 women from Amanda's circle who had been slow to update their sympathies, and I'd heard about it secondhand and been more grateful than I could easily say. My father came to visit for a long weekend in the summer. He was good with Ethan in the unshowy way that quiet men are, patient, interested, willing to sit on the ground and build things. I watched them in the backyard one afternoon. My father crouched next to Ethan over some project involving sticks and dirt that apparently had elaborate rules I wasn't privy to, and saw the angle of Ethan's head, the set of his jaw, and thought of the 2 photos and felt something settle further into place. After dinner one evening, after Ethan was asleep, my father and I sat on the back porch with beers and didn't talk for a while. Then he said, "You doing all right?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than I expected. It takes time to know what you lost versus what you escaped." "I know," I said. "I think I escaped something." "I think so too." We sat for a while longer in the warm summer night. The neighbor's yard had fireflies, and Ethan's soccer ball was sitting in the middle of the grass where he'd left it, and somewhere down the street someone was playing music too quietly to identify. "She told people he wasn't yours," my father said, after a while. Not with anger. Just stating it. "Yeah." And then his school photo looked exactly like mine. "Yeah, Dad." He shook his head slowly. "It's the most specific kind of justice," he said. "When the truth just arranges itself." I thought about that for a long time after he went to bed. The truth arranging itself. It wasn't quite what had happened. I had arranged quite a bit of it deliberately, methodically, with the help of an attorney and a private investigator and several people who chose to do the right thing after doing the wrong thing for too long. But there was something to what he said. The photograph, I hadn't engineered. I hadn't planned for my father to pull out that old school photo and put it next to Ethan's on the kitchen table. That had been the truth moving on its own, finding its own visible form. I had a colleague at work, a project architect named Dana who had come onto the West Loop project 6 months in. She was sharp and funny and direct, and we fell into a working friendship built on 12-hour days and catastrophic blueprint revisions and the specific gallows humor that comes from being responsible for keeping large amounts of concrete in the air. We ate lunch together most days and complained about the client's changes in requirements and debated structural approaches to problems with the kind of good-natured ferocity that serious work produces. It was several months before I realized I was looking forward to Monday mornings again. It took another few months before either of us acknowledged that what was happening was something other than professional friendship. Dana had been divorced for 3 years and was thoughtful and unhurried about everything, which I needed. I was wary in a way I hadn't been before and was honest about that, and she received that honesty without making it into drama, which told me something important about her. We went slowly. We had dinner away from the office for the first time in January, 8 months after we'd started working together, and Ethan met her in April, presented as Daddy's friend from work, and he was politely interested in her for approximately 4 minutes before returning to his soccer ball, which she later told me she'd taken as a good sign. We were not rushing anything. We were building something, carefully, with attention to what we were putting where. I heard about Amanda through Ryan, occasionally, and through other channels when information arrived without my seeking it. She had left the design studio, apparently under circumstances that were professionally uncomfortable. I didn't have the full picture and didn't need it. She was living in an apartment in Elmhurst and seeing a therapist, according to Linda, who remained in loose contact with me in the way of people who feel they owe someone something and try to pay it in small installments of information. The social world she'd had in Naperville, the book club, the neighborhood friendships, the comfortable social fabric she'd maintained while keeping her secrets, had frayed considerably. Some of those women had come back around to her over time, I assumed, because people do. But the version of Amanda that had existed in those spaces, the Amanda everyone had known, was a different person now, and some of what had changed couldn't be changed back. Greg Holloway had moved out of his house in Oak Park, as far as I knew. What had happened with Jennifer was not my business and I didn't track it. It was 2 years after the divorce was finalized that I ran into Amanda. I had not been planning for it or dreading it in any acute way, it simply arrived, the way things do. I was at Ethan's school for the spring concert, sitting in the second row with Ryan and Christine, watching 31st graders arrange themselves on a portable stage with the barely organized chaos of children doing formal things. Ethan had a speaking part, a single sentence, and he was visibly nervous in the way that only slightly shy children get nervous, standing very straight and blinking more than usual. Ryan had his phone ready to record. Christine was already leaning forward with the attentiveness of someone prepared to be tremendously proud. Amanda came in late, which was unlike her, and sat in the back. I saw her when I turned around to check the door, and we made eye contact for exactly 1 second, and then I turned back to the front. She looked thinner. Her hair was shorter. She looked, in the brief and impersonal assessment I allowed myself, like someone who was getting through things. When it was Ethan's moment, he stepped forward, and delivered his single sentence in a voice that was audible to the entire room only because the hall went extraordinarily quiet at exactly the right moment, and then he stepped back with the particular expression of profound relief that is specific to children who have just completed their first public performance. Ryan and Christine erupted in entirely disproportionate applause. I clapped and felt the pride move through me like a physical thing, warm and total, nothing complicated in it at all. Afterward, in the lobby, the inevitable happened. The crowd organized itself in the way of school events, everyone converging on the cookies and juice, and Amanda found her way to where Ethan was standing with me, and they had the hug and the conversation that parents who share children have to find a way to have. I stepped back slightly and let them have it. Ethan told her about his moment of forgetting the sentence and then remembering it, which I had not known had happened, and Amanda laughed and held his face in her hands and said he'd been perfect, and he beamed. Then she looked up at me, over Ethan's head. "He was really great," she said. "Yeah," I said. "He was." There was a pause. Around us, other parents and children moved and talked, the ordinary noise of a school event. "David, Amanda." I said it gently, not harshly. "We're good. He's good. That's what matters." She looked at me for a moment, and I could see her working through something, deciding whether to say more, and then she looked at Ethan again instead, and her face did something complicated and private, and she nodded. A few minutes later she said goodbye to Ethan and left. I watched her go and felt very little. Not contempt. Not residual anger. Something closer to the feeling you have when a chapter of a book has conclusively ended and you've already moved several chapters past it. Ethan pulled at my hand. "Can we get 2 cookies?" "1, I said. 2. 1, and you can have some of mine if you want." He considered this negotiation seriously and then accepted. We went to get cookies. That evening, after Ethan was in bed, I sat in the kitchen with the light on and the house quiet around me. I had the old photo of my father on the counter. I'd had it framed, small, unobtrusive, and it sat on the kitchen shelf next to a few other photographs, the ones I'd kept of good things. My father at the kitchen table in Grand Rapids. Ryan at his wedding. Ethan on the beach at Lake Michigan, age 3, holding a rock he'd found and looking at it with the serious appreciation that 3-year-olds bring to interesting rocks. And Ethan's latest school photo. First grade this time, the blue background again, the same slightly formal posture. Looking at it still did what it always did. You could see my father's face in it, the same bone structure, the same eyes, the same particular expression that sits between serious and about to smile. She had told everyone our son wasn't mine. She had whispered it across dinner tables and book clubs and at family reunions, building a private alternative version of events that she could maintain while I remained unaware, trusting, continuing to show up in my son's life as fully as I knew how to. She had constructed a world in which she was a woman carrying a private sorrow and I was someone she had decided what to tell. And then the school photo arrived, and it looked exactly like my father's face from 66 years ago, and the truth that had always been true arranged itself into a form that anyone could see. I had a good life. It was a different shape than the one I'd planned, built on ground I hadn't expected to be building on, with a smaller house and a new city and a child who was growing up in 2 homes and handling it better than I'd feared. It was a real life, built of real things, and I had made it with my own hands in the 2 years since everything burned down. I heard from Linda, a few months after the school concert, that Amanda was still in therapy and doing better, that she was working again in design. I received this information the way I receive most news of her now, with a mild, impersonal wish that she would find some peace, because she is Ethan's mother and what happens to her happens at some level to him, and I want good things for him above all else. But it did not shake me. It did not reach the part of me that had spent months being reached by things about her. That part had receded to a place that was no longer easily touched, not by her specifically, replaced by things that had more direct claim: Ethan's soccer ball in the backyard, Dana's particular laugh, Ryan's voice on the phone, my father's old photograph, the morning light in the Wilmette kitchen, the ongoing, demanding, deeply satisfying work of building things that are meant to stand. I was, by any honest accounting, happy. Genuinely and specifically happy, in the unheroic everyday way that is the only kind that lasts. I had built that, too.